And so with no further ado, I'd like to introduce Pat Bassett. Pat is the president of the National Association of Independent Schools here in the United States. In that capacity, he represents more than 1,700 independent private schools, K through 12, more than 1,700. Every good private school in the United States at the pre-collegiate level is represented by Pat Bassett. And he is an incredibly dynamic, capacious, insightful, and inspiring representative of our field. Frankly, for myself, Pat is my educational hero. If I come back in another life, I want to come back as a Pat Bassett. Pat is indefatigable. He is on the road, he tells me, about 60% of his time. And so he has a tremendous presence in the school world. He's really on the ground with us, a tremendous sacrifice in terms of his time commitments. And he's a wonderful, wonderful guide for all of us. I can tell you that the National Association of Independent Schools was rather on the downturn when Pat came. So much so that when I was first a school head 12 years ago, I did not think that the NAIS was worth becoming a member of for my school. And now the NAIS, I think, is the most important voice in American educational discourse in terms of any sort of institutional representation. And it's because of Pat Bassett. Pat also, I don't know how he does it, but he finds time to serve on many pro bono volunteer nonprofit boards, including, this is far from exhaustive, the board of the Council for Spiritual and Ethical Education, the Council for American Private Education, Williams College, and most prominently, I think in his mind, the Cushing Academy, 21st Century Advisory Board. Pat has flown here to give this presentation today from a family vacation in Colorado. And so we are especially grateful for having him with us this morning. In a matter of moments, and certainly by the end of this hour, you will know why I consider him my educational hero, because he will be yours as well. Pat.
Thank you very much, Jim, for that introduction. My wife certainly would not recognize the person you described, but I'm happy to be here and to share with this incredible gathering. And actually, I hope this will be a model for the schools in the room. All of us should be gathering international and global partners together to discuss the future of education. So it's my pleasure to be here to do this with you this morning. So I want to begin, given your theme of happiness, I want to begin on the note of unhappiness. Interject that into the conversation. And I'll begin by asking sort of a fundamental question. Are schools designed to fit kids? Or are schools designed to fit adults? Largely, they're designed to fit adults. So when we create the next iteration of your school, it will be designed to fit the needs of kids. And that's partly what I want to do with you this morning. So I'm reminded of this when I remember what my 5-year-old granddaughter told me after the first day of kindergarten. I called her up. We live in Washington, D.C. She lives in Boulder, Colorado. We called her up, and I said to her, Avery, how was your first day of school? And she said, it was great, I loved it, but it's a long time to keep your shoes on. which for me is a perfect metaphor of the fact that it is a long time to keep your shoes on, for kids. By the way, there is a United States school where you don't have to wear your shoes. And it's an NAI school. It's the school the President of the United States graduated from, Punahou School in Hawaii. When in the elementary school, you do not have to wear shoes. So I want to begin by a provocative statement is that actually many kids, at least in the United States, hate school. Well, actually, they don't hate school. They love going to school. They just hate class. Now, why do they love going to school? Because that's where their friends are. That's where they get energized. That's where they, run free in the playground. But it's class that's debilitating to many kids. I mean, that's what all the research tells us. Largely, really, actually, the smartest kids have the hardest time with class often. Except there's a small minority that actually does love class. That would be you. Teachers actually have always loved school, and they want to stay in school. So there's this tiny proportion of young people who will one day be teachers who love class, every single one of those classes, no matter what happens, right? But for the vast majority, there's something that's not working. Actually, there are a lot of things that are not working in school, in class. So we want to talk about that and work a little bit on thinking through what that means. By the way, this is true of college as well. There's something called the National Study of Student Engagement. There's a high school version. If your school's not administering it, it should be administering it. You need to know how engaged your kids are. Otherwise, how do you make good educational decisions about the change path? It's obligatory for all schools, right? So at the national level for colleges, here's what we find out. The kids value more than going to class. Internships, study abroad, senior thesis, and original research with a professor. And all of them have an experiential side to them, I might point out, which is part of the theme of this conference and my presentation. And so part of the solution to schooling for the future is to make class experiential and not, what I'm doing right now, not teacher-centered, teacher-focused, delivery of a flood of information. There's a usefulness to doing what I'm doing today, especially if you have a little bit of time and a lot of material to cover. This is why we use this particular means of presentation, kind of lecture approach. It's effective, efficient, and necessary in small doses. But it cannot be the primary or only means by which education is delivered. I want to quote our most famous scientist. It's a miracle that curiosity survives formal education. And in fact, again, if you look at the data, it doesn't survive formal education. Creativity. We actually have a lot of research now in the United States about creativity. Creativity dies in school. In other words, Sir Kenneth Robinson, if you don't know who he is, you definitely want to Google him. Look at all his videos. They're fantastic. He's the world's most foremost authority on creativity. And what he documents is that kids come to school incredibly divergent in their thinking, incredibly inquisitive and imaginative and creative. And school kills that. By the time they finish school, kids are incredibly conformist and monocultural, monovisual in terms of how they see the world. Exactly the opposite of the intention of a symposium like this. So school is the culprit, not kids. Kids come open-minded, creative, imaginative, discovery-oriented, right? School kills that. We cannot let that persist. That's why we're here, thinking about an alternative to that. So actually it starts to decline most precipitously in the 4th grade. Something changes in American schooling in the 4th grade. Something dramatically different happens. And it's all about the change from discovery to homework and testing and state-mandated testing and kill and drill. Drill and kill, we call it. Working in notebooks, filling in bubbles, not fun, right? Not engaging anymore, 4th grade on. And by the way, in America, boys are really in trouble in American schools. So much so that the matriculation to the freshman class in college in the United States this year will be 60% female, 40% male. Actually, males have never really prospered in schools, given that boys, my own grandson being a key case in point, they need to be up, moving about, not regimented in seats and in schedules that militate against their energy, right? So boys are having increasingly difficult times in American schools. Not good. So I don't blame the boys. I blame the context in which education is provided. So brain research confirms, brain research, this is new knowledge for us in the last decade. We actually know how people learn, we know how brains work, we know how emotions are tied to learning, right? And what it tells us is that adolescents in particular are primed for action, stimulation, and relevance. Too little of which is perceived to actually happen in class. You know, why do we need to know this is actually not a insurrectionary question. It's a legitimate, why do I need to know this? Well, why don't you have the answer for that? You need to know this because we're going to use it tomorrow in a real world engagement. That's why you need to know this. That just changes the calculus of learning. If what you're teaching me now I'm going to use tomorrow to help someone do something, right? That's different. That's what experiential education is about. So David Elkins wrote this book a decade or more ago, The Hurried Child, and I think many of you know the book. This is my favorite passage from the book. I won't read it to you, you can read it yourself, but basically the girl says, you know, we're all, you know, in the schools that I represent, these are all college preparatory schools, kids are well prepared for the academic future. But you know what this kid says? You know, we're smart. We learned how to be smart. We learned to talk good. You know, we talk good. And if you actually do the homework and talk good, you're going to get good grades. It's all part of the game is what she's saying, right? What I really want to do is build a porch. I want to do something that's sort of useful, has a remote relationship to being useful for somebody else, right? This is embedded in adolescence. You know, for me, I think it's almost a spiritual thing. I believe from that point on, kids start to understand they have an obligation to others. And they actually know that my own meaning as a human being is connected to others and helping others, right? So as we consider the path for education in the future, of course, we want to do more of that. And actually, higher ed sort of getting it too. So my organization, we study schools, we study universities, we study graduate schools. We want to know what the path of education is about. So this is the Bible for higher ed, the Chronicle of Higher Ed, right? And cover issue on tools for life. In other words, hands-on. This is meant to be a connection here. Let's build the porch here, literally. You know, let's do something, hands-on. The future of American colleges may lie literally in students' hands. It's refreshing to hear universities actually think this way. And if you want the kind of scholarly, intellectual rationale and justification for what this experiential ed is all about, read this book, Shop as Soulcraft. Matthew Crawford is a philosopher and teaches philosophy at the University of Chicago. This is like the pinnacle of academic intelligentsia. University of Chicago Philosophy Department. Sorry. But guess what he also does? He runs a motorcycle repair shop. So he lives in these two universes. The intellectual universe and the hands-on, fix somebody's, troubleshoot, you know, an old motorcycle. Fix that motorcycle so it can run again. Troubleshoot it, really. Get your hands filled with grease. You know, work with real people. Right? So it's an extraordinary book because what he does is he links the two. Use of your hands, use of your mind. This is what actually, you know, excites learning. Insights learning. So actually our classrooms, the design of our classrooms, I mean this is on the table now. We're at Cushing Academy that's designed a new table and a new configuration around which to learn. This is what all of your schools would want to be asking. Do we have the right space, the right configuration of space? Do we have the right furnishings? can we create a membrane between the walls and the outside so that actually outside becomes inside and inside becomes outside? You know, this is what schools will look like actually in the future. And all of us have some obligation to design it. So our Bible is Education Week. Here's their headline issue. The classroom is obsolete. It's time for something new. So what is the new? Well, we're at a school that's actually examining that and acting upon it. The article has these 12 principles about that new classroom and that new school building that you're obligated to create. And they are really the essence of what the new expectations for schooling will be. Personalized, safe, inquiry-based, student-directed, collaborative, interdisciplinary, hands-on, culture of high expectations, green, strong connections to the local community and business, globally networked, setting the stage for lifelong learning. So those are the conditions that have to emerge, and they emerge in part by the classroom settings and the school building settings and the connectedness to the locality and the world that you create. All right, so this leads me to sort of the three big questions that I speak all over the country and the world about, and I'd like to share with you today. So if you were a board of trustees of an independent school, a private school in the United States, and I were addressing you, I would say it to you this way. What are the skills and values that the 21st century will demand and reward? That's it. That's the most generative and basic question for school. You know, it's basically, what's the purpose of school? The purpose of school is to educate young people so that they are successful contributors to their families, their workplace, their country, and to the world. Well, to be successful contributors to your family, the workplace, your country, and the world, you need skills and values. Everybody with me still? It's sort of basic, right? So what I want to say is new is to say, well, let's actually see if there's any agreement in the room, in your school, in your country, in the world. And guess what? I'm here to tell you. There's universal agreement on what the skills and values are that kids will need in the 21st century. So if I had a half a day with you and we did this the way teachers do it, we would converse and we'd tease it out and we'd all come to agreement. I only have like 30 seconds, so I'm going to do it a different way. I'm going to give you a big hint on the answer to this question. There are 5 skills and values that the world agrees upon, and they all begin with the letter C. So give me one C that we all agree is essential for kids to have. Collaboration, creativity, communication, critical thinking, and curiosity is part of creativity. Well, I'm coming back to that. The one that we miss is the most important one. Character. Character. Now, the values of Bhutan would be subsumed under this broader C of character, right? And all of the 8 major religions in the world have the same set of basic values that they subsume, that I would subsume under this title, character. It includes spirituality, it includes integrity, fairness, justice, right? Empathy, compassion. The world's religions, they all agree what we mean by character. It has to be embedded in schools. And it could be, and should be embedded in the kind of experiential education that we create. So the 5 C's plus 1, if you're interested in the documentation for what I've just said, you can go to the NAIS website, www.nais.org, and search for this phrase, 5 C's plus 1, O-N-E. And you'll find one of 7 blogs. This first one gives you all the documentation. Where did I get this sense that the world agrees? Well, from all over the world, right? But then the next 6 take each of these C's and examine how that's playing out in progressive schools. What does critical thinking actually mean now in the 21st century? It's changed, by the way. I mean, there's something that's universal and always been associated with critical thinking. Deep thinking, right? Research-based thinking. Demonstrably true and provable thinking, right? But what's changed about critical thinking for me is this. You don't have to get it from me or your teacher, your professor, because everything is now accessible to anyone everywhere through the internet. That is the single biggest revolution in education in the history of humankind. It finally and forever democratizes access to information, knowledge, and truth. Never before, ever, happened. In fact, the whole history of humankind has been attached to power limiting access. Even the professions through the 20th century, the legal profession, the medical profession, every profession, the business profession, limits access to information and therefore gathers and garners and wields power, influence, and wealth. That just changed. If everyone can access everything, anywhere. By the way, 4 billion people out of 6 billion have access to the internet through smartphones. 4 billion out of 6 billion. Now, it might be one cell phone in a remote village, but people have access. So this has changed and will increasingly change everything, right? So anyway, if you're interested in exploring each of these 6 areas, the 6th is cross-cultural competency, what I call cosmopolitanism. Someone mentioned it. And I'm going to spend the last 10 minutes or so of my presentation showing you the way in which schools are starting to think about what you're doing at this conference, developing cross-cultural competency. So the second question is, what are the big shifts that are occurring in education all over the world, and how are schools manifesting them? And then my third question is meant to tie everything together in a sense. If these big shifts are happening, what does that have in terms of implications for the skills and values that we're meant to teach our kids? So see if we can get all that covered. So the first of the 6 shifts is the shift between knowing and doing. And I want to begin by saying that for your lifetime in this room, what's been important, apparently, according to schools and universities, is knowing as manifest on taking a test. That's actually how we assess knowing. Take a test. Right? Well, we all know from our own experience and from the research, if your motivation is just to take a test, you forget within 10 days after the test what you knew. So what is the point of that if the measurement is taking a test? Right? So what's happening in experiential education, like robotics or anything else under the broad category of STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. By the way, that's transmogrifying into, in America, what we call STEAM. Science, technology, what's the A? Art. Art. So art can be part of this, and very much is, actually. Into doing. Yeah, you need to know your math and your physics. But the test is creating a robotic, some robotics product, or a robot that can actually do something. That actually is so engaging to kids, as opposed to, filling in the bubbles on a test. So here are young kids in an international school in Japan. And here was their test. They worked in teams, right? So there's the collaboration part. And the test was to create and build and program a robot that could find its way through a maze, and at the end of the maze, take a tennis ball and throw it through a hoop. And I just want to say, if you have your own kids or grandkids or nephews or nieces who are, let's say, 8 years old. You want them to be able to do that. They're going to know way more math and physics if they can do that than by going through the textbook. I promise you that. So here's the high school version. This is here in Massachusetts, Falmouth Academy. And a couple of years ago, they're part of a national competition, the New England regional part of it. The test was to build a robot that was submersible. Have any of you ever dropped anything into like the bathtub? Does it ever work again after you've dropped it into the bathtub? No, right? Anything mechanical, right? So the job is to create a submersible robot that actually works underwater. And its task was to find an object at the bottom of a dark pond, wrap a rope around it, and retrieve it safely back to shore. Now, if you're 11th grader, your 16-year-old can do that, where is he or she going to college? MIT, Stanford, you know, Tech. Well, the captain of the team is at MIT. Because if you can do that on a team basis, you know more math and science than most of the people in the world. Right? So it's doing. Now here's the backstory. That's even more impressive. The captain of the team I got to have a conversation with, and he was telling me that this was their second year, so they won the competition in their second year. They're very proud of that. By the way, competition is important, not just collaboration, competition. You want your girls to be as competitive as your boys. There's a natural, instinctive need, I think, to try to be competitive. It helps kids learn. It's why badging works in games. Even if you're just competing against yourself, competition is still important, right? So anyway, the kid tells me, yeah, we stunk our first year. We were the small team, we were all boys, we didn't know what we were doing, and we performed poorly, we embarrassed ourselves in our schools. So we committed to doing way better the coming year. So there's some resolve, there's some character. You see how all the C's sort of start to work together? He said, well, I said to him, well, what did you decide to do first? He said, we decided to bring girls onto the team. And what he was really saying is a very important insight for a young man, which is, girls think differently than boys, right? We need people who saw the universe differently. And secondly, we brought on underclassmen. Well, why did you bring on, 10th graders and 9th graders? Well, he said, because we knew we were going to do better. And we wanted these young people to develop some institutional wisdom so that the year after us, they wouldn't have to start from ground zero. So how smart is this kid, right? He gets it and sees the work. This is a math and physics problem, basically, and an engineering problem. But he sees it in a larger context, right? This is what you want as your outcomes for, schooling. It's not about the paper and pencil test. I'm sorry to tell you this. Actually, I hope you're pleased to hear it, right? In the independent school world, it's not about the test. It's about the outcomes, the student growth, right? So here's my favorite example of robotics. This is a grenade launching robot. So it could be oranges or it could be snowballs. And in my most infamous illustration, in Connecticut, there's a school where their signature event for the 6th grade, all 6th graders form teams and they all build these grenade launchers, but they're snowball grenade launchers. And the exhibit or the exam or the demonstration of learning happens, the whole school shows up, all the parents come, all the teachers are out there. Because the test is the head of school drives his car across the parking lot. And all these snowball launchers are, hurling snowballs at the head's car. And the head agrees to drive in a straight line at a specified speed, okay? But the reason everyone shows up is, it's pass-fail, by the way. Either your snowball grenade launcher hits the head's car or it doesn't, right? But everyone shows up because the head agrees to leave the windows down. So if your team hits the head in the head with a snowball or an orange, right, you get an A+. And everybody's, cheering on every snowball that gets launched. So what I've just demonstrated, is that boring, by the way? Would that be fun for your 6th grader to do? So I'm just curious, for all the schools in the room, what is your signature event for your kindergarten and your first grade? What's your signature event for your 6th grade? Your signature experiential education project for your 11th grade? If you don't have it, you're not on the right page, in my opinion. You're doing the last 3 centuries of school instead of the 21st century of school. So you could do other manifestations of this, rocket launchers. By the way, I forgot to mention the thing about the snowball grenade launchers that I want to impress upon you. It is essentially a time, rate, and distance math problem in part. Time, rate, and distance. I actually know how you were all taught time, rate, and distance. A train leaves Boston at 3:43 p.m. heading north, right? Another train leaves Bangor at 3:47 heading south, right? Is that not how you were taught? Yes. And here's your homework. 37 more train problems. No wonder smart kids hate school, or any kid hates school. That's the way we teach time, rate, and... How about hit your head in the head with a snowball as a time, rate, and distance problem? See what I'm getting at, right? So, but you could do rocket launches, or in this case, building bridges. So this is St. Andrews in Maryland. This school's demonstration of learning, or exhibition, is each team builds a bridge, their version of a bridge. It has to be tested, hold so much weight. It has to be unique in design and attractive, right? And now they're doing their mastery exhibition, and the team speaks about their design. So we're getting the communication piece in. You got the collaboration piece, the critical thinking and design piece, the communication, the creativity piece. You know, it's all there. When you approach it, well, what is the skill we're teaching? The discrete skill. Let's take the physics skill. But in the context of actually creating something. So that's the first. The second is teacher-centered versus student-centered, and much the same. So I'll run a little clip for you. This is the 3rd grade assignment. The signature event is invent something.
You think we needed to? Why do you think kids need to be wedgie-proofed?
Well, when someone gives you a wedgie, it hurts.
Yeah.
And when we made wedgie-proof underwear,
Yeah.
it won't hurt anymore.
Okay. We want to see, Jared and Justin, we want to see how it works. So go ahead, stand up very slowly. Who is going to be, let's see, it looks like Justin, you're going to perform the wedgie on your brother Jared, right?
Yeah.
Okay, this is going to be a pain. Tell us what you're doing.
Buddy trying to get his help us spoil a wedgie.
What? You just pulled the band right off of his underpants?
Yep.
Because they are rip away or tear away underwear, right? Jared, what's going on with you right now? You're without a band.
Right now I'd probably be running to tell the teacher.
What you're doing best.
So is there any question in any mind why it was important for these two to invent wedgie-proof underwear, right? Obviously, they were victims of wedgies all the time. So what they invented was Velcro banded underwear. So when a bully comes and pulls your underwear, the band comes off, and it's reusable. You just Velcro your band back on your underwear, right? So here's the point. Are these kids electrified in the 3rd grade by learning? Because they get to decide what's important. They get to be inventors, like big people are inventors, right? They get to actually hands-on do something that's fun. So my own grandson's version of this is his 3rd grade teacher said, well, we're going to teach you how adults do research. You're going to do research. You form your own teams. You decide what's important to research. You do the methodology. You test your hypothesis, and then you come to a conclusion. So he calls me all excited. Papa, I'm getting to do research. My 2 best friends are on my team. So I said, Carter, well, what's your important question for a 3rd grader to answer? He said, We are going to discover why girls are so mean to boys. I say to Carter, Carter, there's money in this because men don't know why women are so mean to men. None of us know the answer to this. So he's all pumped up. Oh, by the way, Carter, how are you going to do your methodology? Well, we are going to interview every girl in the school. And that's what they did. So 2 weeks later, he calls me up, all excited. We finished our research. We know the answer. Carter, what's the answer? It turns out when girls are mean to boys, it really means that they like you. And then he said, you're not going to believe this, Papa, but nearly every girl in the 3rd grade is mean to me. So there's a lot of delusional stuff going on. But the larger point is, I mean, the kid is on fire. This is a kid, by the way, we had to take him out of public school because locked in a chair 6 hours a day. This kid had to be up and about and moving about. He's in an experiential school now. I mean, he is on fire. He's the best promoter of the school. They use him in admissions because he's so excited about learning. He can't wait to get to school. And this is what happens to many, many kids once they get in the right setting. By the way, I want to recommend Rick Ackerley's book, Encouraging Character, Curiosity, and Creativity in Children. This starts in preschool. These 6 C's really start from the very beginning. So how do parents and schools collaborate in encouraging this? I don't want to imply by my presentation that we don't still think scholarly work is important. Scholarly work is important. Traditional scholarly work is important. But if you want your kids to be world-class in that, you would have them submit research, original research of their choice, their topic, to the Concord Review, published here in Massachusetts. It is an extraordinary publication of world-class high school research and writing. That's the pinnacle. It's competitive, right? You think you're smart, you think you're good, you think you can do research, you think you know how to write. Compete against the best in the world. Now, even if you don't get published, if your ambition is to be that smart and that good a writer and researcher, this is an ambition, part of character. It's an outcome you would want for your kids. Now, sort of the flip side of what I've just said is this orientation towards strengths, the strengths-based movement. In America, and perhaps in the rest of the world, kids who had difficulty in school often had a learning difference. Dyslexia, for example. I just want to tell you there are a disproportionate number of Fortune 500 presidents who are dyslexic. That should tell you something. It's not that reading is absolutely essential. Easy reading, easy writing, absolutely essential. It's that if you are imaginative and creative and persistent, you can find workarounds for your differences. And at the same time, you know you have to build on your other strengths. So we have a saying in America, which is this: the A students become teachers and preachers, and the B students end up working for the C students. And what we mean by that is the C students are the socially engaged students. They're the ones who are entrepreneurs often, right? School's a distraction for their larger ambition. So what I want to say is that we shouldn't have this dichotomy. We should have that ambition built in, of course, into the way in which we do schooling. So what I really want to say is that if you were going to reform school, one tiny adjustment that would make the difference for all your kids would be to this. At the secondary school, high school level, instead of teaching 6 classes or courses superficially, or asking kids to take 5 or 6 courses for which the outcome is superficial knowledge, how about this? Do that for 4 courses. You decide which 4, or let the kids decide which 4. But let me double up in the one area that I have passion about. It could be math. And if it's math, I need way more math than you can offer me. But you can give it to me now through online learning or the local arrangements you have with your university. Could be dance, right? Could be art. Could be anything. You want all your kids to want to come to school and be engaged? Let them spend 1/3 of their day doing what they're passionate about, so that they become really good at one thing. Here's an insider's piece of advice to you. They'll be much more attractive university candidates because they'll be really good at one thing instead of superficially good at 6 things. So, in my granddaughter's case, she's good at painting. She's dyslexic, by the way, and she's young. But from the very beginning, she decided that abstraction was really the way she was thinking and feeling. So she's gotten really pretty good for a young student in painting. So we're putting her into school, my daughter's putting her in school where she can do more painting. Now for math teachers, I want to recommend Dan Meyer. He's a public school teacher, and he gets all this stuff about what engages kids. So he's a good resource for math teaching at every level. And here's one screenshot from a film he makes. So he takes a flip camera and he starts shooting baskets. And what he shows the kids is he cuts off the film before, what they see, cut off before the basket hits the backboard, right, or the hoop. And then you can see on the bottom, he superimposes a graph of a parabolic curve. And of course, if you teach geometry, you know there are equations for this, x and y equations. So the point for the kids is, learn your geometry, figure out what this equation is, and therefore project whether or not the ball goes through the hoop. And you can bet on it. So they got teams working on the math and betting on the outcome when he hits the camera and they see whether or not the ball goes in. The kid, I mean, whoever thought that kids would become electrified about parabolic curves, right? It just is beyond imagination to me. They're on fire. So estimation. Kids aren't taught estimation very well for whatever reason. And estimation is a key, actually, skill. By the way, it's essential for SATs, for example. If you have no idea if your answer is right or wrong, you're going to get the wrong answer. Right? So anyway, he teaches estimation by taking the kids to the mall. And in the mall, they've got all these math problems. One is he runs up the escalator. He runs up the escalator. And they have to estimate how long it will take him to get up. Right? So he comes up with creative ways to teach these skills. Here's an early childhood education version of it. Kids learning about gravity and velocity. And, you know, the teacher's just on the sideline here and then teases out from them what they've learned. Same school, the painting version, the task was to paint Boulder in the summer. And I sort of like this painting. I feel sorry for the little girl with the red toenail polish. Apparently she has a bad case of carbuncles. But I think maybe there's a linear sequence going across the top. There's a bright sun, very hot, and there's a rainbow and the cloud with the rain in it, right? And then you see the sun's really hot again, and the rainbow starts to collapse in, and all of a sudden it becomes a hot dog in the next frame, right? Third, individual versus the team. This is very, very important for schools, and it means changing actually what you expect out of school. And the idea here is school rewards individuals and not teams. I mean, class time, school during class. After school, we're very good in the independent school where we're making kids play on teams and do drama and music together, right? So after school, kids get a team, but not during class. That's got to change. Every Nobel Prize now is won by a team, not an individual, right? Almost every one. I did the research the last 40 years, 5 out of those 40 years individuals won physics on Nobel Prizes. So it's about teaming, right? Academically, not just extracurricular. And the way we're seeing this, this is the school my grandson goes to called Watershed. They do these expeditions. So experiential education is also expeditionary education. In this case, it's an expedition to the border of Colorado, and the whole immigration challenge in the United States is part of their lesson. Or a similar one is to the source of the Colorado River. Now in Colorado, nobody wants to move from Colorado. Everyone loves Colorado. It's a great state. But they don't have any water. They think California steals all their water. And they're right. California steals their water. So the kids start the year by going to the source. And they do this camping, hiking, climbing, outward bound kind of thing. Here's what outdoor education teaches. How to take care of yourself, your stuff, and your responsibility to the team, right? Those are actually life's important lessons right there. It goes to character, right? You got to learn how to take care of yourself, your stuff, and the team. And middle school kids are very bad about all three of those things. It should be the centerpiece of education for middle school kids. And you can do this in the garden. Do you have a garden where you grow your own organic food and the kids grow their lunch? Schools do this now. This is this passing through the membrane of the wall here of school, right? Or this is the Grand Tetons Journey School. What are your journeys? What journeys do you take? You know, my grandson's school, Watershed, takes their middle school to San Francisco for the Creativity and Design Conference they had there. And the fourth is the consumption of information versus the construction of meaning. And so this is a good illustration of the larger theme I'm trying to convey. So how do American businesses work? Here's your two choices. You can read a chapter in a book, social studies book. This is how business works. Put me to sleep, please. Or how about this? 6th grade signature program in one of our Texas schools. Start a business. In this case, it's an egg business. The kids buy the chickens, raise the money, buy the chickens, raise the chickens, clean the cages, harvest the eggs, package the eggs, market the eggs, sell the eggs, and do the P&L, the price and loss, on an Excel spreadsheet. So, choice A or choice B? Which class do you want your kids in? Read the social studies textbook or start a business, right? Lifelong understanding coming out of the 6th grade and engagement. Forensics is big now in many schools. I'm a huge fan of teaching science through forensics because it raises the stakes, the kids' excitement level. This school in New Mexico, every year, it's one of their signature events, a teacher commits a crime. And then school stops for the 6th grade. Full time, they go into what we call CSI mode, right? CSI is this program in America that's all about how science can solve crimes, right? We got 6 versions of CSI. That tells you something. Americans are seeking and hoping that science will solve problems. We have this faith in science. We need more than science, but be that as it may. So they're doing the footprints and the fingerprints. They're interrogating faculty. Awesome stuff. And of course, they're learning a lot. This girl's part of a design studio. The most current wave in schools of the future is the design concept. What goes into design? Exploring, imagining, experimenting, prototyping. And 3D prototype printers. 3D printers, we call them. Fabricators. Here's another school. They call it the Fab Lab in Marymount in New York. They have a fabricator design studio. So it's not just conceive of a product to solve a problem. It's to design it using CAD, computer-assisted design software, and then you feed the software to the printer and you produce a 3-dimensional product as a prototype. So it's soup to nuts. And by the way, these machines used to cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. They now cost $25,000 for, independent schools that's accessible. Anyway, I also want to recommend a program that we run. Any school in the room worldwide can participate. We call it Challenge 2020, and here's how it works. We have identified Jean-Francois Richard's book, High Noon, as a key statement about the 20 global problems that persist, and that if we don't fix, will be the end of us, right? We all know what they are. We could have, if we had time, produced the list ourselves. So what we say is to schools to teachers around the world, any class level, kindergarten through 12th grade, pick one of these that your class is interested in. We'll match you with an international school. So every school in Bhutan, if you wanted to, we would match with an American school to take on one of these problems. Whatever problem the school or the class wanted to take on. And here's the assignment. Using the internet, begin to collaborate on researching and solving the problem and come up with a global, national, and local solution and begin acting on the local solution. And so we're in our 5th year doing this. Hundreds and hundreds of schools participate. It's an extraordinary project. So here's an 8th grade here in Massachusetts who we connected to a third world country where women in the poor village had to walk for miles with ceramic pots on their heads to get water. So the kids wanted to take on the water deficit and the poverty problem. And so their imaginative solution was to merge a roll-on luggage bag with an igloo container. And so they've come up with this, what they call the water walker. And they're negotiating with Igloo, the company, to see if they'll produce it. This school is a Montessori school in Denver. And they wanted to take on infectious diseases, specifically malaria. Now we know what the global third world solution to malaria is. What is it? Nets. Okay, nets. Guess what? That's fine for adults because they have beds in the third world. But kids don't have beds. They sleep on the floor in the poorest regions of Tanzania, which is where we connected them, right? So these kids decided, the American kids said, well, what our little brothers and sisters like to do is crawl through the tunnels at McDonald's. So why don't we fabricate a collapsible aluminum frame and cover it with mosquito netting? And that's what they did. And so there's a little girl inside that it's hard to see inside one of these nets. It collapses. You can throw it on the floor. It takes no space. And so our 6th grade class in Denver has a U.S. patent pending on a solution for third world juvenile malaria. Now, does this not sound more exciting than studying third world poverty? That's what we've done forever. Let's study cultural geography. Let's study poverty. Well, let's just actually do something about poverty, about disease. Very, very different. All right, last two, schools versus networks. What this conference exhibits is going beyond your own school, your own silos, right? I'm fond of saying, quoting someone I forgot, that one of the issues for the profession is teachers like working in silos. We call it parallel play. You know? Well, parallel play is not the future. Networked play is the future. So I want to recommend this particular network. Anyone public or private can join it. Anyone globally can join it. You will find colleagues on this network, or you could introduce yourself, every single important topic about teaching. And you'll have an international conclave. We call it PLN, Professional Learning Networks, right? All of a sudden, you've got all these opinions and experiences that can refresh your own thinking. So I was an English teacher. I liked this particular project. Somebody else has gathered 4 film clips on the climactic scene in Shakespeare's Othello, the murder of Desdemona, right? And there's the Orson Welles version, the Laurence Olivier version, the Lawrence Fishburne version, and there's a version from the TV comedy Cheers, which is hysterically funny. So I'm saying, my God, somebody else has already done my homework for me. What an imaginative, creative way to teach Othello. By the way, if you're teaching Shakespeare, kids have the biggest problem reading that text. It's extremely difficult. It's punishing to kids, actually. But if you teach it with a video and help them then ascertain what their version of interpreting that scene would be, it's a very different way of teaching. Single sourcing versus crowdsourcing. The whole idea here is that we can capitalize on through the internet on bringing more people into solving our problems, solving our challenges, teaching and whatever. As it turns out that the biochemists have a big problem with DNA sequencing in a certain challenge that they have. So they went to gaming, and they combined gaming with crowdsourcing. And so now little teams, families all over the world are taking DNA sequences. There are all these badges and little awards on the internet if your team advances the sequencing solution. And as a consequence, they are accelerating by decades their attempt to do the sequencing. By the way, gaming is an amazing therapy for kids with autism. Our school should be accommodating all kids, in my opinion. even kids with autism, and some of us do, some of us don't, and there are new strategies for doing that. Crowdsourcing is helping us learn about those. By the way, leadership training. Deloitte, one of the biggest companies in the world, it does its leadership training online, and guess what? Gaming and crowdsourcing are part of that future. All right, I've just got a minute or two left. I want to say something about high-stakes testing versus high-value demonstrations. The future is demonstrations and not high-stakes testing. And if you are a progressive school, you'll be moving towards portfolios, digital portfolios of what your students have done, K-12, not just test scores. In the last minute, I want to take that 6th C and demonstrate how cross-cultural competency is beginning to emerge. So when we look at cultures, including our own culture, we find that there are different norms in terms of how people see themselves in the world, right? The norm on the left tends to be a Western, European norm. The norm on the right tends to be subcultures within our own country and many other cultures around the world. So very, very different ways of seeing the world. The research also shows that schools, when they try to do what we're doing here at the symposium, they focus above the water, you know, what's visible. But the more important issues are below the surface in terms of how people see things differently and how their attitudes and values are different. So an illustration of this would be, by the way, I call above the water food and festivals. That's, you know, we do food and festivals in our schools as if that's global cross-cultural competency training, right? So here's a good illustration. Those are 2 photographs. Very quickly, tell me in your own mind, decide, which is more attractive to you, aesthetically pleasing? So about 90% of Americans would choose the one on the left. But Far Eastern folks would choose the one on the right, mostly. And the difference is that for Americans, our orientation is individuals. For other cultures, their orientation is contextual, the individual in a context. So, you know, in terms of aesthetics, what's pleasing in terms of art, very, very different orientation. So the interesting thing is there's now a mobile app for this, for your iPhone. There's based on decades of research and what we call 5 dimensions of identifying cultural differences: power, individualism, masculinity, uncertainty, and long-term orientation. So it's a free app. It's called Culture GPS. I recommend it to you. It's awesome. And it's a way to get your students to start thinking. So I want to show you some distinctions. There's the United States profile. There's Japan's profile. And very, very different. So the United States, low on power differential, meaning less respect for hierarchy, more respect for the individual to find his or her own way. Japan's, you know, significantly higher regard for the laws of society and rules and hierarchy. Individualism, way high in the United States, way low in Japan. Right? Very, very different orientation. The third is masculinity versus femininity as a culture. Masculinity meaning more of a proclivity towards aggression. Right? Femininity as a culture meaning more of an orientation towards collective responsibility. Right? And then uncertainty avoidance, that's all about, in this case, the Japanese have a need for all kinds of rules and systems to prevent uncertainty. Right? In America, much more freewheeling, okay, chaos prevails, that's okay with us, right? Very, very different. Long-term orientation, very, very, very low long-term orientation in the United States. That's not good. Long-term orientation in the Far East in general, but not exclusively, very, very long. So by the way, I have this, I just did it yesterday for Bhutan as well. So you'll see there's the United States, there's Bhutan. Extremely different orientation. So that could be subject for further conversation. So I'm going to end with a very quick story. So I was in Japan that illustrates this point. And this is really sort of meant to tie everything together. Your kids won't understand Japan or Bhutan or any place else until they go to Japan. Or they have Japanese and Bhutanese students here living with them. Then they'll start to understand these cultural differences. So I'm in Japan doing a presentation at a school for a group of educators. And the head tells me this, that two things. One, in that school, every year, the foreign language department chooses its own department chair. So it's a little bit different of a system. In the school, there are 5 Japanese women teaching Japanese, and there's 1 American teaching French and Spanish, right? So they're having a departmental meeting, and it's time to choose a new department chair. Well, what the American didn't know is that in Japan, if you're the senior-most faculty member, you are the one who's supposed to become the leader because of the deference for wisdom and associated with the most experience, right? But also in Japan, you're expected to be modest. So what happens is something like this. I'm the most senior member of the department and have not yet been chosen to be chair. The person next to me would say, the Japanese person next to me would say, Madam Tanaka, you should be the department chair. We so respect you. You've done so many things for us. You're very wise. You should be department chair. But she's obligated to say, I couldn't possibly do that. I'm not worthy of doing that. It's just culturally expected. So she'll say, well, how about Mrs. Suzuki? She should be the chair because she's a wonderful innovator. And they'll go through this ritual. And Mrs. Suzuki said, well, no, I can't do it. I'm not worthy, and I don't have the skills that others do in the room. So this goes on for the first 4 Japanese women. So you know what the American does? She raises her hand and says, oh, what the heck, I'll be department chair. so you know, the culture, you know, you cannot lose face in the culture. And so the Japanese women have to say what? Thank you so much. We're so pleased that you agreed to be department chair. Except you know what happens? No one answers any of her emails, no one answers any of her telephone calls, and no one shows up for the departmental meetings. So she figures out after 2 weeks, guess what? I guess I'm not supposed to be the department chair. So she resigns. The person who's supposed to be chair gets to be chair, and order is restored to the universe. You understand? This is so unlike America. This would never, ever happen this way in America. But you don't go to Japan and do business unless you understand these cultures. So one other quick example. Just, I was there right after the earthquake and tsunami. So I'm reading the headlines. These are 2 headlines you would never read in America. Here's the first headline. 70 and 80-year-old Japanese are showing up at the nuclear plant to volunteer to do the cleanup. So what's that about? We're old. We've enjoyed a life. You shouldn't send the people you've hired, your staff who are young. They're too young to die. We're showing up to die for the collective good. This would never, ever happen in America. And the second headline was the equivalent of $70 million washes ashore after the tsunami. No packaging, no identification. It's all turned into the authorities. Because in Japan, this is not your money. You have an obligation to whoever's money it is, so you turn it into the authorities. They'll find out who lost their money. In America, the attitude would be, thank you, God, for answering my prayer. I mean, it was destined for me to get this money. Right? So let me just finish by saying that we have so much on the table here, guys, right? So much of what can and should happen in schools, and the fact that you're here at this symposium suggests to me that you're ready to, and maybe already implementing. So thanks for the time with you listening.